Let me tell you something before anything else. There's a moment in nearly every person's life when something shifts beneath the surface. It's nothing that shows up in the news. It's nothing your neighbors talk about. It's quiet. It's internal. And it almost always goes unnoticed because most people are too busy reacting to the noise outside to feel what's moving right here on the inside. My name is Walter. I've lived long enough to recognize that moment when it comes. I've seen it in others. I've seen it in myself. And that's exactly what I want to talk with you about today. Not to get you worked up, not to promise you miracles, but to show you something that's been sitting right in front of you that you may not have looked at squarely yet, because something is coming, and almost nobody has realized it. Let me start with a simple observation. Have you noticed that lately certain things have stopped making the sense they used to? People who once pulled you close have started to drift. Rooms where you used to fit have started to feel tight, like a shirt that shrank in the wash. Conversations that used to entertain you now just tire you out. And there's a restlessness you can't quite name. It isn't sadness. It isn't anxiety exactly. It's more like part of you is waiting for something that hasn't arrived. Most people read that as a problem. They think they're losing something, that they've fallen behind, that something's gone wrong with them. But I'll tell you, with the calm of a man who's watched this play out before, that isn't a problem. It's a sign. And it's the first hint that you're among that minority, that 1%, being prepared for something the crowd won't ever come close to living. Let me explain what I mean by 1%, because it isn't just a turn of phrase. When you look at history, and I mean the history written in Scripture as much as the history unfolding in front of our eyes, you start to notice a pattern. God almost never works through the majority. He works through the few. When He wanted to carry humanity through the flood, He didn't choose a nation. He chose one man and that man's household. Noah spent years building something nobody understood, under a sky that gave him no evidence, surrounded by people who laughed. The crowd had the numbers. Noah had the assignment. And think about what that actually cost him. Decade after decade of being the strange man, the obsessed man, the one who couldn't let go of a warning nobody else could hear. He didn't have a single ally outside his own family. He didn't have proof. He had a conviction that made him look foolish to everyone who passed by. And the rain didn't come for a long, long time. If being chosen meant being celebrated, Noah would have given up in year 2. It didn't mean that. It meant standing alone with something true while the world treated you as a fool, and being right after everyone had stopped watching. When Gideon went to face an army he couldn't count, God did something that makes no military sense at all. Gideon had 32,000 men, and God told him that was too many, sent most of them home, then took the few thousand who remained and cut them down to 300. 300 against a horde. And the point wasn't the strength of the 300. The point was that when the impossible happened, nobody could mistake it for human effort. The few weren't chosen because they were the strongest. They were chosen because they could carry something the many couldn't. That's the thread I want you to hold on to. Being set apart has almost never looked impressive from the outside. It has usually looked like being smaller, quieter, more alone, more overlooked. The crowd is comfortable. The few are being shaped. Now here's where I want to get specific, because Vague encouragement is cheap, and you didn't come here for cheap. What's coming isn't a lottery ticket. It isn't a sudden windfall that lands in your lap while you keep doing exactly what you've always done. I've watched too many people wait for that version, and they wait their whole lives. What's coming is a turning, a door opening onto a road you've been unknowingly walked toward for years. And the reason almost nobody realizes it is that the preparation rarely feels like preparation. It feels like delay. It feels like being passed over. It feels like watching people with half your depth get twice your reward and wondering quietly whether you were forgotten. You weren't forgotten. You were being made ready for something that couldn't be handed to the version of you that existed 5 years ago. Let me tell you about a stretch of my own life, because I don't believe in talking about these things from a distance. There was a season, years back, when everything I touched seemed to stall. I had worked hard. I had done, as far as I could tell, the right things. And yet I sat in a kind of holding pattern that lasted long enough that I stopped expecting it to end. I remember a particular night, nothing dramatic, just an ordinary night, sitting at my kitchen table with the lights low and feeling the full weight of being unseen, not by people exactly, by life, as if I'd been set on a shelf and the world had moved on. I'm telling you this because what I felt that night was the exact thing I'm describing to you now, and I had no idea what it was. I thought it was the end of something. It was the beginning. Within a couple of years, nearly everything that mattered in my life had reorganized itself. Relationships, work, the way I understood my own purpose. And when I looked back, I could see that the stall hadn't been punishment. It had been construction. Something was being built in me during the very season I assumed nothing was happening. There's a detail from that time I almost never tell anyone. During the worst of it, a man I barely knew said something to me in passing that I couldn't shake for years. He looked at me and said, "You're not stuck. You're just early." I didn't understand it then. I thought it was a kind thing to say to a tired man, but he was right in a way neither of us fully grasped. I wasn't behind the people who seemed to be passing me. I was on a different clock, and the thing about being early is that it feels exactly like being late until the moment it doesn't, and then you realize you arrived at precisely the hour you were meant to. That's the trap of the preparation. You can be standing right in the middle of the most important chapter of your life and experience it as the most pointless. The 1% aren't the ones who get an easier road. They're the ones who eventually learn to read the road differently. So let me give you something practical to read, because I want you to walk away able to recognize this rather than just feel good about it for 4 minutes. The first marker is the thinning out. I mentioned the people drifting away. Pay attention to that, because it's rarely an accident and it's rarely cruelty. There are seasons where God lightens the load before the climb. The connections that fall away in a preparation season are usually the ones that wouldn't survive the next altitude anyway. It feels like loss while it's happening. It reveals itself as mercy later. Think of Abraham, told to leave his country, his people, his father's household, to walk away from everything that defined his belonging before he could become the father of nations. The promise required the departure first. The leaving wasn't a side effect, it was step one. The second marker is the disinterest. The things that used to satisfy you stop satisfying you. People mistake this for depression, and sometimes it is, and if it is, please go talk to someone who can help you carry it. I mean that plainly, because not everything heavy is spiritual, and it takes wisdom to tell the difference. But there's a particular kind of dissatisfaction that isn't sickness. It's a recalibration. Your appetite is being changed because you're being moved toward a different table. The old food stops tasting like enough because you're being prepared to be fed by something else. The third marker is the strange clarity that shows up in the middle of confusion. You'll be in a hard stretch, genuinely uncertain about the surface of your life, and yet underneath it, there's this odd, steady knowing, a sense that you're not actually lost, even though by every visible measure you should be. That knowing is one of the most reliable signs I've ever found. The crowd doesn't have it. The crowd has either false confidence or open panic. The few have this quiet floor beneath their feet that they can't fully explain. And there's a fourth marker I want to add, one that almost nobody talks about. It's the way you start being drawn to depth. You lose patience for the shallow end of everything, small talk, empty entertainment, the endless scroll that used to fill your hours. You find yourself hungry for meaning in a way that almost embarrasses you because the people around you seem perfectly content with surfaces. That hunger isn't you becoming difficult. It's you outgrowing a size you used to wear. A person being prepared for weight has to develop the capacity to hold weight. And that capacity comes in the form of a craving for things that matter. When the trivial stops feeding you, it's not because something broke. It's because something grew. Now, I want to slow down here and say something that the loud voices in this space almost never say, because it doesn't sell. Being among the 1% is not a reward you earned by being special, and it's not a license to look down on the 99. I have very little patience for the version of this message that turns people into spiritual aristocrats, convinced they're better than the ones around them. That's not the chosen life. That's pride wearing a religious coat. Look at the people God actually set apart in Scripture, and you'll notice something humbling. Moses argued that he was the wrong man, that he couldn't even speak well. David was the boy nobody thought to call in from the field when the prophet came to anoint a king. His own father didn't put him in the lineup. Joseph was the dreamer his brothers couldn't stand, and the gap between his dream and his throne was a pit, a false accusation, and a prison cell. Ruth was a foreigner, a widow, a woman with no standing, gleaning leftover grain at the edges of someone else's field. Not one of them looked like the chosen one in the moment of their choosing. They looked overlooked. They looked unqualified. They looked like the last person you'd pick. And notice something else about that list. Their being chosen didn't spare them the hard road. It walked them straight into it. Moses had 40 years in the desert tending another man's sheep before the burning bush. David was anointed king as a boy and then spent years running for his life from a king who wanted him dead, hiding in caves before he ever sat on a throne. The anointing came first. The cave came after. If you've been told that being chosen means the difficulty ends, you've been told a comfortable lie. Being chosen means the difficulty has a purpose. Those are not the same promise, and the difference between them is everything. That's the pattern, and it matters. Because if you're waiting to feel worthy before you'll believe something is coming for you, you've misunderstood how this works entirely. The set-apart life doesn't begin when you finally feel ready. It usually begins precisely when you feel least ready, in the season you'd most like to skip. So, what is the what's coming that almost nobody realized? Let me say it as plainly as I know how. It's the moment the preparation turns into deployment. There comes a point, and for some of you it's closer than you think, when the long, quiet stretch ends, not with a whisper, but with a sudden demand. The thing you were being made ready for arrives, and it arrives needing the exact version of you that the hard years produced. The patience you developed waiting, the discernment you sharpened in the confusion, the strength you built carrying weight nobody saw. All of it gets called on at once, and you'll understand in that moment why none of it could have come sooner. Joseph spent 13 years between the pit and the palace. 13 years that, from the inside, must have looked like a man's life being wasted. And then one morning, he's pulled out of a dungeon, cleaned up, and standing in front of Pharaoh. And within a single day, he goes from prisoner to second in command of the most powerful nation on earth. The shift was instant. The preparation was not. And every year of that preparation turned out to be load-bearing. He couldn't have governed in a famine without having first survived one in his own soul. Think about the specifics of what those years built in him. In Potiphar's house, he learned to manage an entire estate, administration, logistics, the handling of resources. In prison, he learned to interpret dreams under pressure and to serve faithfully in a place that owed him nothing. Every single one of those skills was the exact skill the famine would demand. Storing grain through 7 years of plenty to survive 7 years of want is an administrative miracle, and Joseph had been quietly trained for it in 2 places he never would have chosen. He didn't know he was in school. He thought he was in exile. He was in both. That's the structure of what's coming. Long preparation, sudden deployment, and the deployment uses everything. Nothing is wasted, not even the parts you're ashamed of, not even the failures, not even the years you'd cross out if you could. Let me name the danger now, because there's always a danger right at the threshold, and the 1% who miss their moment usually miss it for the same reason. They quit just before it turns. I've seen it more times than I can stand. Someone walks the entire long road, builds the entire foundation, develops everything the moment will require. And then, in the last stretch of the waiting, when the silence is heaviest and the evidence is thinnest, they decide it was never real. They settle. They go back to the crowd. They take the comfortable thing because the set-apart thing asked them to wait longer than they thought they could. And the cruel part is that they often quit weeks or months before the door would have opened. Elijah, right after one of the greatest victories of his life, sat down under a tree in the wilderness and asked to die. The man who had just called down fire from heaven was, days later, so exhausted and so alone that he wanted out. That's not weakness of faith. That's what the threshold does to people. The moment right before the breakthrough is very often the moment you feel most like giving up. And that's not a coincidence. It's the nature of the terrain. What God did for Elijah, there wasn't a lecture. He let him sleep. He fed him. He let him rest twice before he said another word about the assignment. Sometimes, the most spiritual thing happening in your life is that you're being allowed to recover before the next thing. And here's the part of Elijah's story people skip past. When God finally did speak, It wasn't in the wind that tore the mountains, or the earthquake, or the fire. It was in a low whisper, a still, small voice. The man had been expecting God to show up the way he had on Mount Carmel, in spectacle and flame. But at the threshold, God came quietly. I think there's something in that for the few. The confirmation you're waiting for may not arrive as a thunderclap. It may come so softly that you'll only catch it if you've gone quiet enough to listen. The crowd is always waiting for the fire. The few learn to hear the whisper. So if you're in that stretch right now, if you're tired in a way sleep doesn't fix, if you've half decided that the thing you sensed coming was just a story you told yourself, I'd ask you to hold on a little longer than feels reasonable. The 1% isn't defined by talent or by how special someone felt. It's defined, more than anything, by who stayed on the road long enough to be standing there when it turned. Let me bring this down to where you actually live, because none of this means anything if it stays abstract. Tomorrow morning, you're going to wake up into an ordinary day. The preparation doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It looks like an ordinary day. The deployment, when it comes, will probably also start as an ordinary day until the moment it isn't. So the real question isn't whether something is coming. The real question is whether you'll be awake enough to recognize it and whether you'll have stayed faithful in the small, unglamorous, unwitnessed things long enough that you're ready when the large thing asks for you. Be faithful in the quiet. Keep your word when no one's checking. Do the work nobody applauds. Guard the inner thing, the knowing, the floor beneath your feet, even when the surface is chaos. That's not religious busy work. That's how the few stay few. That's how you remain the kind of person the moment can actually use. There's a line in the Gospels where Jesus says that the one who is faithful with little will be trusted with much. People quote it like a motivational slogan, but sit with it for a second, because it's actually a description of the entire process I've been laying out. The much is the deployment. The little is the long, quiet, unwitnessed preparation. You don't leap from one to the other. You're promoted from the little to the much by what you did, when only the little was in your hands and nobody was looking. The crowd despises the little. The few understand that the little is the proving ground for everything that comes after. I told you at the start that something is coming, and almost nobody has realized it. Here's the part I saved for the end. The reason almost nobody realizes it is that they're looking outward, waiting for a sign in their circumstances, a change in the weather of their lives. But the first place it shows up is inward. It shows up as the restlessness, the thinning, the disinterest, the strange clarity, the hunger for depth. Those aren't symptoms of being lost. They're the early architecture of being sent. You're not behind. You're not forgotten. You're being made ready. And the very season you've been trying to escape may turn out to be the most important one you'll ever live. My name is Walter, and I've sat where you're sitting. So before you go, I want to hear from you, not a generic comment, a real one. Tell me about the stretch of your life that felt like a dead end at the time, but turned out to be the foundation for everything after. What did you almost quit right before it changed? Leave it below. Someone reading this needs to know they're not the only one standing in the long quiet, and your story might be the thing that keeps them on the road one more day.